But a very big welcome tonight from UBI Lab Manchester. We've got an hour and a half of what we hope is going to be quite an interesting evening. And basically, I'll just run through what we're going to do tonight. I'm going to introduce the lab and what we're doing tonight. And then Josien Piek from UBI Lab Den Haag is going to talk to us. Then we're going to have a bit of a group chat about what we're here for. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms and then come back again at the end. So basically, we're here to talk about UBI and inflation. But I wanted to give you a sort of bit of background on what and where this came from. So Manchester, probably most of you know, is a big industrial city in the north of England. Just to give a bit of context, we have our county round it is called Greater Manchester. It can be a bit confusing. So there's 10 boroughs of Greater Manchester, and Manchester city is in the middle, but the lab covers the whole of Greater Manchester. So this past year, I feel like we've done quite well as a lab, sort of politically. We've got Andy Burnham to join the cross-party group on UBI, which is brilliant because it's made up of MPs and mayors and all sorts of things. Andy Burnham is the mayor of Greater Manchester, so the mayor of the wider region. And he's now quite interested in UBI and basic income. He came to our launch event in February and was sort of quite interested. And by the time he came to a meeting that we had in July in Manchester, he was saying, come on, Greater Manchester, rise up, let's be the first place in England to have a UBI pilot. So I think he was inspired by the Welsh pilot as well. So that, you know, but that's all going very well. So at that meeting, we said to him, okay, what can we be doing before we get a Labour government in this country? What can we be doing in the meantime in Manchester? And he suggested maybe a pilot on homelessness. So we're pursuing that. So all that was going well, but we still felt that what we wanted to do as part of the lab was to sort of reach out across Greater Manchester. So we had a members meeting, and one of the things we all decided we wanted to talk about was the jolly difficult questions people ask us when we talk about UBI, when we're not talking to each other, because we all think UBI is wonderful and all the rest of it. But you start talking to people and they start saying, yeah, but how will it be afforded? And won't people just sit on the sofa all day doing nothing and that kind of thing? So we had a meeting where we all got our post-it notes out, very exciting, go back to post-it notes, you know, all in a room together, and came up with these challenges that Louis, I think, is going to put in the chat for us. Dave Beck, who's on the call, he wrote these up as notes, and you can see all the questions that we came up with and some of the discussion that we had. However, we ran into a bit of a block when we came to the question of inflation. It's something that we were all thinking, this is a question that people ask us quite a lot. Inflation, UBI, surely if everybody is given money, everybody gets the same amount of money, the price of everything's going to go up. And we decided we needed some expert help here. So I put out a call on the UBI Lab network, and I was delighted when Josien from UBI Lab Den Haag said, yes, she'd come along and she would talk to us about UBI and inflation and sort of kickstart this process. There we are. Louise put that document, that Google Doc in of all the discussions that we had about the questions and challenges and that sort of thing. So tonight's meeting is part of that conversation about going out and talking to people. And what we wanted to you to imagine is that you're talking to, and this is Josien's words, and I really like them, a kind-hearted soul. So somebody who's prepared to listen to you, but probably not for that long, and probably not in terribly technical terms about what the impact or lack of impact UBI will have on inflation. And in the breakout rooms, just so you're mindful of what we're asking you to do later, we want you to come up with some ideas about what this response could be. So we're going to hear from you soon. We're going to talk about it. Then we're going to go into breakout rooms and see if we can come up with some ideas for how we might talk to this kind-hearted soul. So you're with a friend or a family member, you're having a coffee, a glass of wine, you're on a car journey together, and this comes up. And they ask a very reasonable question. They're not trying to be difficult. And you can't just go, oh, that old chestnut. Rah, rah, rah. You've got to have something good. You've got to have something good to say to them. So I think I'll hand over to Josien now, who's a macroeconomist. And she's going to take us through a short presentation on UBI and inflation. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Alison. How beautifully in time you were. Indeed, I saw the list of difficult questions that Greater Manchester came up with. There, it's a wonderful document. Actually, all the tough questions are there. So now what we're going to tackle indeed is that question: will UBI lead to inflation? And for that, I'd like to go into a little bit of, but I feel a little bit nerdy about this. So it's going to be, it might be a bit too technical, a bit too nerdy. Just bear with me, and then later in the breakouts, we can sort of make it into something a bit more, palpable, and make sure that it becomes something a bit more, something we can discuss maybe. So I'm going to go to, let me see, share my screen. I made some slides to talk about inflation. Oops, is this working? Can you see it? Yeah, yeah, I'm seeing yes. Okay, that's good. I'm just going to make it big like that. Okay, so will UBI lead to inflation? And I realize I should have started with the pain of inflation. We're now all experiencing inflation, massive inflation, more than 10%. A lot of the countries are having that, which has a lot to do with this energy market, which is in pain right now. We're still investing way too much in fossil fuels. They're actually getting more and more expensive due to war and other problems. We have not invested enough in renewable energy, which in the end is, of course, energy that is completely for free. So we're living in an inflationary time, which is, okay, we'll talk about that. But so the pain of inflation, I really understand that it is very painful and a big problem. What I would like to do is just go to the very basic theory of monetary theory, which I've been studying, and it goes like this. I don't know if you can see this. It's incredibly simple, and you think it can't be true, but this is really what monetary theory tells us. So if we make a very simple economy, we have 200 pounds and we have 2 apples. So that's the money supply. It's the relationship between the money supply and the stuff, and they relate to each other. So with 200 pounds and 2 apples, each apple is worth 100 pounds. Very simple. Now we're going to create inflation, right? And there are 2 ways to create inflation. Either we add money to the system. I think that's the first I'm going to do. Is that the one? Yes. Okay. Either we add money to the system. So now we have 300 pounds. We still have 2 apples. And all of a sudden, the apples have become 150 pounds each. So we have inflation. That's one way to create inflation. The other way, and we're going to do the flip side, is we go back to our 200 pounds economy, but now we only have 1 apple. So if we have less goods, but the same amount of money, then also inflation is created. It's 200 pounds for this 1 apple. So you sort of think this cannot be, this is actually all there is to monetary economics, and I studied it for 6 years, so I found it very, funny in a way. And it is, you can look it up, it's the monetary theory, the formula. Let me just see if I can, because it's a bit covered up. It's money supply, M, times velocity of money, and that's how quickly money changes hands. We did not really discuss that because we had a static economy, is the price level times the quantity of transactions. So it's important because we're going to use that a little bit. Let me see. Does this still work? Oops, wait a second. Page down. Yeah. Okay. So we've established how money and stuff work together. And inflation, it's important to see, is it really a relationship between money and goods? And that if that relationship is a little bit out of balance, then we get inflation. Now we're going to split the economy in two. We're going to say, well, we have speculative goods, which I define here as goods that are held for financial return, and we have basic goods, which are, I make it a little bit beautiful, necessary for human flourishing. So that's really food, energy, housing, transportation, education, healthcare, the good stuff. And the others are held for financial return. So that's bonds, stocks, and real assets. Now, what is really interesting is that money behaves differently in these two different parts of our economy. So let me just that away. Yeah. So money in the speculative goods side is actually it's a store of wealth, and what it does is that we have that formula of money times velocity is price times quantity. It pushes more towards the P side of things because it can't go anywhere else. So there's much more inflation on the speculative goods side when we add more money to the system, which we're not actually going to do with UB. So it's a little bit. But what happens in the basic goods side, and that's also very important. As long as there's an ability to look after the things that are to make or to ensure that they're there, then not the P will go up, but the quantity will go up. And that's really important. So in this world of basic goods, it's much more like a fountain. It's much more in flow. So money is allowed to flow. There's a lot of transactions. There's a lot of people buying bread for their kids and people going to the hairdressers to get their hairs beautiful. So the money flows, whilst in the speculative goods side, money is trapped. That's how I'd like to say it. So, in a way, UB is almost like something about let's liberate money to be more of the virtuous flow, which is, good for everybody. Okay. I'm a bit afraid that it might get a little bit too technical again, but I'm just going to wing it. And if then we know that it should be. But what I would like to say right now is we go back to our real world. We have all the theory of the monetary. What is it? The monetary economics. We have that now, and we go back to the real world. So what has been happening in our real world? Well, you know what? We have been adding a massive amount of money. That's not we, but the global economy. So over 25 trillion has been added since 2008. First, we had a great financial crisis. We have to add more money. And then, of course, we had COVID, and we did like 3 times more than we did already then. So there's a huge amount of money has been pumped into the system. Now, actually the very interesting thing is for the last 10 years, we have not seen much inflation. Now we have, of course, this energy-led inflation. But after all this money being pumped in, what did we see? We did not see inflation on the ground. So the basic goods were just sort of plottering along. But what we did see is massive inflation in speculative prices. So there you see, I put just the stock markets. The stock markets are doing great because all that money is leading to enormous inflation there. But there, actually, inflation is seen as a good thing. I would say it's not such a good thing, but it's not seen as the painful thing of paying more for your bread every single day. So that's the quantitative easing. So what I'm trying to get at is that a normal economy should look like the left-hand side, where you have let's call it nature. Some people call it natural capital. It sounds a bit horrid, but nature, just things just happening naturally. Then you have your basic economy on top, and then you have a little bit of speculative economy on top. That's how things should be in a good order. What we have been doing, the speculative economy has grown enormously. So a lot of that money is being sucked up into the top of our economy. The basic economy is really suffering and being squeezed, and nature is actually almost dying. So we've we've turned our economy on its head, and it's only serving a very small group of people well, and the rest is really having a terrible problem. And nature is not, of course, we all know how bad things are there. So one thing that UBI can do is actually, it can bring back an equilibrium that we have lost. So bringing money back to the of course, we are not going to add money to the system. We're just going to make sure that through taxation, money goes from the top back to the base of the economy. And it will lead to, let me just see when I can't read myself, a more, what did I put there? Sorry. More demand for basic goods. Indeed, we're definitely going to see, you know, more food, more education, more maybe more healthcare, more goods will be demanded, and it will also allow for an optimization process at that level of people doing and making things for each other. And of course, we will need some very clear ecological boundaries to do that in. Otherwise, it will get, we will undermine the base of what we're doing. So it's bringing back equilibrium. And that's, then money can be the virtuous thing, which it actually always was. It's not only now in our economy, money has become such a trapped unit, but we're looking to liberate money back again, that it can become the fountain of interactions that it should be. Now, on that basis, I came up with a couple of arguments why UBI will not lead to structural inflation of basic goods, I should have said, because of course it has already led to enormous inflation of speculative goods. But first of all, we're not touching the money supply, right? We're not increasing money with UBI. So we're just saying we're redistributing it. We're taking it from the top to the bottom sounds, but to the base. It might lead indeed to a higher velocity of money. So that if they're getting very technical, probably this kind-hearted soul will not say that. But indeed, money might change hands a little bit more frequently, so that the economic, we call that a high multiplier. But actually, that's a really good thing, because that just means that the base of the economy will have more transactions happening. So people will be, getting more of their needs met. And so indeed a higher quantity of transactions, and that I think is also really important, because we are living in such transitionary time. We actually need a lot of these smaller interactions, people going to the shop, buying their bread, people having solar panels and having a small mini grid with a couple of other people to have their energy met through solar panels, local food cooperatives. We're going to have to tinker a lot more in smaller groups to make sure that we have an economy that is working within its ecological boundaries, which of course currently we do not have at all. And finally, and I think that's really important, it's going to liberate money back to being the happily flowing substance that it used to be in a way in the old times, instead of being trapped in all these vaults with families with 30 billion on their bank accounts, which is incredibly unhealthy for their their mental health as well, I think. Look at Putin. So we can start getting money back at the base of our economy, where it should be. And let me see. Then this is a drawing I really like. It's in the United Nations gap report, carbon gap report, and it is made on the basis of an 8-year-old, a drawing of an 8-year-old kid, she was then 8 years old, and then we can get back to this economy, which is actually much more pleasant and much more working, and a more beautiful world that that our hearts know is possible. So that's the monetary take on. Let me go back to. Do I stop share? There we are. So yeah, I basically went into the monetary theory and saying, well, inflation comes about when there's more money than goods. And then I said, well, in the speculative side of things, if you add more money, indeed prices go up. But in the basic economy, if you add more money or more demand, more money as well, because then that will lead to much more transactions. There is the productivity capacity is so big that it will lead to more transactions and not to more inflation. That was it, Alison.
Thank you, Josien. And again, perfectly timed. Look at that, 1924, brilliant. Okay, that was great. That was really interesting. I mean, I've never studied economics, so that's really, really, really helpful and useful for me. Thank you. So now we've got some time to discuss this, ask questions, make comments. And I think when Josien and I were talking about this meeting, we didn't want it to be a sort of lofty expert talking and then you know, people just asking some questions. It's as if we were all sitting around in a room in a circle and we'd all like everybody's contribution. And it really doesn't matter if you are an economist or not, or if you can, you know, that we're trying to get away from any kind of jargon, any kind of difficult language. So I would say to you, if you are an economist, to treat this as a sort of experiment in looking at the public understanding of economics, see how sort of clear we can be about these things. So do we have any questions, comments, thoughts from anybody? Dave, you're looking out for anything in the chat as well.
I am. There's been one in the chat from Dora. I don't know if Dora would like to ask it herself.
Perhaps you could briefly introduce yourself, Dora, and then tell us your question or your comment. I think you can unmute yourself.
Or I'm happy to ask.
Yeah, do you want to ask it, Dave?
Yes, okay. So Dora's asked, how does this approach compare to MMT, modern monetary theory?
Yeah, a good one, really good one. So for the rest, modern monetary theory is to say, it says basically, let's just increase the money supply. That will, in a way, lubricate our economy more, and it will not lead to inflation because production can sort of step in and help things go well. So with modern monetary theory, in a way, I would say, well, first of all, let me get my take on it. It makes sense, but it would be I think we will make it very difficult if we actually add modern monetary theory to UBI, because then we have to make sure that people also want to step into that experiment of adding more money to the money supply. And on top of that, the strange thing is we have already added an enormous amount of money through what we called quantitative easing. And nobody's actually talking about it. It's more than 25 trillion. It's absolutely astonishing amount of money already went into this additional money. It was not called modern monetary theory, but so it links to it, but it's not completely the same. If Dora wants to talk about it more, we can even take it offline because it gets super technical. Although I do find it very interesting. It is the very left-wing part of the US Democrats are interested in modern monetary theory. Yeah.
Could I just say thank you very much for that? And what we've agreed to do is that if there's an idea like that comes up that we feel could be pursued further, Louis is going to make a note of it, so that we can sort of stay on track with with what we're doing here this evening, but we don't want to lose anything that people are coming up with there. So thank you very much for that, Dora. I think maybe John Logston had his hand up next.
Yes, I did indeed. Yeah, at the basic level of the economy, the transactions lead to tax, whereas at the top level, in speculation, they don't want to pay any tax, so they don't pay tax. They put it in tax havens. So this actually would increase the tax revenue for the government.
Absolutely, a very good point. Yeah, it's that the basic economy is the virtuous place, but you're totally right. Yeah. I would make a note of that one as well, Alison. That's a really important part.
Okay.
Tax-based increase. Yeah.
Okay. So okay, Louis, you're getting that one. Brilliant. I think it was Malcolm probably next. Sorry, if you went up together, so I apologise if it's a slightly wrong order.
Thank you. I thought that was a good presentation. It just shows how much depends on the detail of the basic income scheme that is implemented. And I think one of the important things to say to people with questions about basic income is that a basic income would never be implemented on its own. It would always be paid for somehow or other. There will be tax changes in benefit systems, maybe a carbon tax, various ways in which you could fund the basic income. And each of those different ways will have different effects. And so some will create inflation and some will not. And so the really important thing always to say to people is the basic income is simply an unconditional income that's paid to everybody. And precisely how we fund it is one of the main factors in the effects that it will have on inflation and the poverty level and inequality and so on. Unfortunately, it'll be perfectly feasible to implement a basic income scheme that would increase inequality. No, we don't want to do that, but it's perfectly possible to do that.
How would Malcolm? Sorry, how would I'm interested to see how it could increase inequality? Because
yes, it certainly can. Depends on how you tax people to pay for it. For instance, if you were to increase the lowest tax rate without increasing the ones at the top in order to pay for your basic income, you could easily increase inequality. And there's some of the research.
Okay, that becomes almost.
It's perfectly possible to do it. And I think we just need to be aware that it's the whole package that has the economic effects. And not
of course, it's how you fund it and where you put your tax is super important. But I'm also interested to understand how you think it could lead to inflation through a bad setup. That's also
I can tell you how it would lead to inflation. There are proposals around to create new money to pay for a basic income. Now, perfectly possible to do that up to a point. And there is a gap at the moment between the productive capacity of the economy and the amount of income going to labour. There is a gap there that you could fill with new money, which would not cause inflation. However, once you've filled it and you then keep doing it year after year, then eventually inflation will be created. It's perfectly possible if you didn't extract that money through the tax system.
Although I'm assuming actually that we're not adding money.
I know you are, and I think that's absolutely right to do that. But there is research going on, and you may have seen Jeff Crocker's research on this that proposes simply creating new money.
I think first we should really point the finger to the system that already created 25 trillion.
Oh, absolutely.
Noticing it.
As I'm saying, you can do it up to a point, but then eventually there comes a point you can't.
You've got to be careful with creation of money. I fully agree. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Malcolm. I think it was Reinhardt next.
First of all, thank you, Josien, for this very interesting and really informative presentation. I actually have got two questions. One is linked to your presentation. I think it's very helpful to separate these two, speculative and basic goods. However, there is a problem. because there's a strong overlap. And I just want to quote the housing market.
Yeah.
And there has been a lot of speculative investment. I mean, a good example is Berlin, which used to be a very cheap capital. People moved there, and now prices have gone through the roof. And it actually has led to the demand to expropriate investors. So what would you say? I mean, because if you try to explain, what would be your comment on this? That's my first question.
Yeah.
And the second one is, I read, for instance, a research about cash transfers in Lesotho, as a sort of basic income, and they actually analyzed inflationary sort of tendencies from village to village. And while in most villages there was no inflation, there was some considerable inflation in some villages where there was not adequate supply of basic goods, and they could not, because the village was remote, it could not be easily transferred to this village. So there is, I mean, this theoretical risk, depending how the economy works, how transport works, that basic income could, at least according to this study, I think it's from Lesotho, could promote inflation. Again, I would like your comments on this one. Thank you.
Excellent, really impressively good questions. And I have thought of them both, so that also makes me happy. That, first of all, the real estate market, so we had the speculative goods, stocks, bonds, but then we had real assets. And indeed, real estate is part of that. And we had in the basic goods, we had food, energy, transportation, all good stuff, but we also have housing. So there is a painful reality that in the basic goods, there's housing, and in the speculative goods, there's real estate. So this is it's actually one of the few markets that are in that there is a real connection between speculation and basic necessity. And that's why it is the market that is the most painful, because indeed it has gone up with this whole speculative wave of speculative goods becoming inflated, becoming much higher priced, and that has had enormous repercussions for the housing markets. Now, we're not going to solve that problem here. That problem is a problem, huge, but it plays quite well into the whole story that we've been just discussing. That how can I say that? It's almost like because of the connection between the two, the problems are huge, and we need to think of it differently. And clearly, in the basic goods, we need to keep housing, because you can't have a good life but have no housing. So it's not for this one, but I really it's a very important part, and I would, again, let's talk about it more and keep it on our list. The other one, I can say, of course, if the money, you start changing the money flow, it's almost like you change the blood flow in your body. Of course, there will be pockets and moments where there will be inflation. Productivity, we're assuming that productivity that is so smart and so quick, and will stepping in. So that village in Lesotho where there is not enough bread, and also the price of bread goes up, we are assuming that somebody's going to say, okay, hey, I'm going to open a bakery here. And so of course it links to our capacity to produce what is basically needed. And as human beings, I think we should say, well, we probably are smart enough to make what is basically needed for all people on Earth. So we're allowed to sort of say, temporarily there of course will be inflations, and you will see this sort of spiking up here and there, but productivity will kick in pretty quickly, unless there's unless there's a war going on and nobody dares to go there. Then of course the price of bread will go completely through the roof. But that will be little pockets of painfulness, which will hopefully solve.
Okay, thank you. I think it was Mark next.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the presentation. I basically agree with most of it, but I guess the point I'm making is probably actually building on what Reinhardt and Malcolm have, to some extent, have just said, which is this idea that Q in your equation can increase. So you're kind of
sorry, Mark, could you just say what Q was again for the
Q was the
rest of
quantity
us?
of stuff produced in that equation.
Right, okay.
Where it was
Of
MV equals
transactions, Mark,
PQ.
not just stuff, but also transactions, so also services. Yeah.
Yeah, so goods and services.
Yeah.
So you were kind of suggesting that Q could just increase, and I suppose I'm just reiterating that there may be situations in which Q can't increase because we're already at the limit of the productive capacity of the economy. And I think there's some evidence that we're at that at the moment because we're getting labour shortages. So I would argue that at the moment Q couldn't just increase in the UK economy because of that.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, okay. That we have a good debate on that. Yeah.
And even if you only get a temporary inflation, if prices stay at that higher level, you've reduced the real value of the UBI. So I think that's still an issue, even if you only get temporary inflation.
Yeah.
Well,
then UBI would need to keep a pace, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So the second point sort of related to that is that I agree that if we're just redistributing money, there won't be a kind of major inflationary effect because you're taking demand out of some parts of the economy and putting it into others. But if the net beneficiaries of the UBI, so basically the lower income people who are going to benefit from this, who are getting more UBI than they're paying in taxes, if they're consuming a larger portion of their income, then you could still get an increase in demand overall in the economy. So that's a bit like adding extra money. So I think
that's the higher velocity of money at the basic level.
Yeah, or they're just a higher marginal propensity to consume.
Yeah.
So I think
higher multiplier.
Yeah,
that's
I
true.
think they still could be an inflationary effect, but overall, I agree that if you're just redistributing money, then there won't be a major inflationary effect. So,
yeah. Okay. Sorry.
No, that's it.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, Daniel. Come to you. Can't hear you, Daniel, sorry.
It's muted.
Sorry, Daniel, you're muted.
Sorry.
Yeah,
just to kind of reiterate on that point, I know that Malcolm, for example, spends a lot of his life kind of modeling, in effect, that, which is redistribution rather than generating more money from somewhere else that is not accounted for at the moment. So it's taking money from some people and giving it to others, right? And I guess I'm thinking about, we're talking about how you explain this to sympathetic, observers, and isn't that fundamentally the point that, that this is about taking money from some people and giving it to other people. And as Mark was saying, normally it's giving it to poor people who have a tendency to spend more of it because they need to spend more of it. But if our economy needs to be able to sustain that kind of activity because that is the right thing to do. So, taking money from some people and giving to others, you cannot justify not doing that because it's going to create some inflation, right? I guess is sort of what I was sort of trying to get to in my head, but I don't know if it makes a lot of sense.
No, it does. I mean, it is, it is, how do you say, this needs to be thought through very carefully, of course, and money. But I think that's actually, I would just like to add that to the point of, let me see, I don't see him now anymore. Where is the gentleman who talked before you, Daniel? Oh, there, Mark. Mark said, well, we're gonna, if the economy cannot increase with more stuff, we're gonna get inflation anyway, because there's just productive restraints. And I think it's really important that we actually add that we are going to get into a phase in our lives, in our economy, where we're going to see massive constraints due to ecological boundaries that we're now hitting left, right, and center. So the fact that we are going to think of it this way: we're going to increase the amount of transactions of second-hand clothes massively. So that is not a queue whereby the old-fashioned queue, we thought, oh, more stuff, we're going to produce more stuff. No, actually, we're just going to swap a lot more of the things that we used to have. And you know, so the way our economy is going to work needs to improve massively. And that getting into that tinkering, as I call it, it's a bit not nice, but of the economy, we need to have more money to lubricate those initiatives. And I think that's actually the biggest reason that UB is not going to lead to inflation, but it is a very, very necessary step to make an economy that is going to start working. Does that make sense, or is it too? Yeah. Yeah,
I didn't really have a. It wasn't exactly a very good question, so thanks. Yes, that makes sense.
It's just.
It's more a comment,
we're always
really,
afraid of, and yeah, inflation is, inflation is something that there's actually almost an emotional fear of inflation. But if we look at, and I think that's also, I mean, I would really want to point out that that more renewable energy is actually an incredibly deflationary power, because it just ensures that we have a large part of our energy at a zero cost. The marginal cost of renewable energy is zero, and that's an important part.
I think what's going through my head is what Natalie Bennett, who's one of our Green Party politicians in the UK, talks about the UBI society, and how that UBI has got to be part of a whole lot of other stuff. It's not, we can't just put in a basic income and then it's going to magically make everything better. There has to be many other systems and discussions and policies.
Absolutely.
We've got a question from Reinhardt, and then I think we're going to move out into our breakout room. So Reinhardt, last question from you in this section, please.
Yeah, just the discussion gave me another question, which I think is important, related to UBI. I mean, I thought economists talk about exogenous and endogenous inflation, and I think the actual situation we are facing at the moment is exactly of exogenous inflation because of the limited supply of fossil fuels. Now, there is a related problem to it. As far as I know, the UK, I mean, I talk not to the UK, doesn't produce sufficient basic goods for its own population. So it depends on, for instance, financial services and so on to import these goods. So my question is, if a UBI would be introduced in the UK at the moment in this actual economic situation, could it not lead to inflation, because the people who may benefit most from it, who need essential goods, would try to buy them, but this country doesn't produce sufficient essential goods, agricultural goods, to supply its population. So I don't know. So yes,
that's actually a great. Then we make it much more complicated. And I've not thought it's a very good question, and I've not thought it completely through. How because then you're adding different countries and imports and exports. The effects of that, and of course then you get inflation. You don't only have inflation, but you also have your currency going up and down to match that. It becomes much more complicated. I've not thought that through, but it is a really important part. And yeah, it's I don't have a clear answer right now, Reinhardt. And I think the UK maybe also is living a little bit above its above its standard, maybe. If a country is consuming more than it's producing, then it becomes permanently dependent on imports, and that is a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, if I just may say, I think this is due to Thatcher policy, which actually destroyed local manufacturing in favor of financial services. So I think that is, I'm not an economist, but that's how I interpret it. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, sorry. So we're sort of hitting the point, the timing. So thank you very much, everybody, for all of that. Now we're going to go into our breakout rooms, and the question is, if this kind-hearted soul says to you, "What about inflation? Won't it go up? We're just going to give everybody money." What are we going to say to them? Given all that's been said, all of the above, what are we actually going to say to this friend or family member, or the person who's cutting your hair, or whoever it is, colleague at work? What could we say? What's our sort of elevator speech kind of response? Okay, so I think Louis is going to put us into breakout rooms, and then we're going to come out at the end of it, and we're going to share what we've got. And if I say this is a bit of an experiment, so if we've got 4 beautifully formed sentences or whatever, that's brilliant. And if we've got a load of thoughts around it, that's also brilliant, because we're just trying to get the process of thinking and talking going here. So don't, sounds a bit pressured, doesn't it? But it's not. It's just to get the discussion going. Okay, thank you, Louis. Take it away. Jean, that's all of us then.
Yes, I think so.
Good. Well, I really enjoyed that. I mean, the last words to be uttered in our breakout room was, "God, it's hard, isn't it?" So I don't know if everybody else found that. Okay, so if anybody's got who'd like to go first? Which breakout room would like to go first? Dave, well done.
Yeah, I'm always happy.
Thank you.
Okay, some really good discussions. I don't think any of us are economists, so we took civilian approaches to it.
Good.
So I was with Dora and Tom, and the discussions with Steve and Tom were really interesting around how we understand and interpret the impact that it could have on the economy. So I wrote a list. I'll just read through the list. We all tended to agree that as non-economists, we understand the supply and demand approach. So if we take plasma TVs or electric cars, you know, when they first hit the market, they're very expensive. But the more people buy them, the price starts to come down, was used as one of the simplest explanations of how inflation won't rise if more people have got more money, because people will keep spending. So therefore, we'd hope that the prices would, as Tom identified, create some form of equilibrium. As long as money is flowing, so Steve made the point that as long as money is flowing, that it's passing through people's hands, it's exchanging, it's buying and selling goods, money is doing what money is supposed to do. And this really is a good argument for ensuring, looking at UBI payments across the social hierarchical spectrum. So if you've got, you know, working class people will spend their money. So if working class people have definitely got money to spend, that they'll simply spend it. That led on to a really interesting discussion around localization and the question over creating a localized economy with UBI. I'm saying it's interesting. It was mainly led by me and my interests, but I was thinking about the Totnes pound, if people have heard of this before. And this was how Totnes they created their own local economy as a way of staving off pressure from big organizations, especially Tesco. And what they did was they allowed people to exchange part of their wage for a local currency, which could be spent in local businesses like butchers, bakers, candlestick makers. But it was worth more than pound sterling. And it was a way to stimulate people to use the local butchers. And apparently it worked. And I used to live on Anglesey. It was something that I was thinking about, was creating an Anglesey pound as a contained geographical entity to see if it would boost the local economy on Anglesey. But we're not sure about the economics of it really, in terms of if people spend £1 in a national retailer a large percentage of that money goes down to London or down to wherever the head office is, and only a small percentage of it stays local. And I believe that if you spend the same pound in a local business, it's the opposite. Most of that money stays local, and only a fraction goes down to London. So we're thinking about this as a way that the UBI could be hyper localized in terms of a form of currency, potentially. Please let me know if I've missed anything in our group. No.
That's great. Thanks ever so much, Dave. Brilliant. Right, who'd like to go next?
Shall I go from our group? We took so in our group, we had Malcolm, Alison, Annette, and John. So we kind of tried to come up with some phrases or some sentences that would sort of sum up to this sympathetic observer or questioner, why they needn't worry about inflation when it came to UBI. So we came up with 3. We're kind of relatively happy with the first 2 as a kind of a thing that you could say. The third one kind of, we were like a big concern that it kind of started to get into something a bit more difficult to explain or difficult to sort of without going into a lot more detail and then getting sort of bogged down. So the first one is simply says, basic income is not about extra money, but the way we organize the existing money. So it's about a secure layer of money for everyone. So that's one reason why we shouldn't worry about inflation regarding basic income. We're not creating new money, it's about redistributing what money there is. That's number one. The second one was, we already have a system of cash transfers. It's the benefit system. So if we don't worry now about those cash transfers creating inflation, then why is another type of cash transfer, this time UBI, why should that be a worry regarding inflation? So I suppose the point here is there's nothing new about taking money from someone and giving it to someone else in the form of money. And so therefore, either all cash transfers generate inflation and we should all be worrying about it now, or none of them do, and therefore there's no particular reason why UBI is more inflationary than any other cash transfer. So that's kind of number 2. And the third one, which we were kind of debating when time ran out, was a UBI provides more income to poorer people than to richer people. The poor tend to spend their extra income on basic goods, whereas the wealthy tend to spend it on more speculative goods. And it is less inflationary to spend on basic goods than on speculative goods. But we thought that was kind of there's quite a lot in there to unpack, and it kind of relies on a lot of assumptions about various different things that it would be difficult to just land that one. So those were our 3 opening gambits for a discussion about inflation with your hairdresser.
Thanks ever so much, Daniel. I suppose it depends on how long it takes you to have your haircut, doesn't it? How long you've got. So.
Not a lot, not very long.
That's brilliant. Thank you. That's a really.
No,
I don't need to add any more to that. That was great from our group. Thank you. How many groups have we got? We've got 3 or 4.
4.
So you froze there. How many groups have we got? 4. So group 3. Who's going to be group 3?
We were group 4, but does anyone from my group want to go? I've got a bit of a headache.
You're doing the technical stuff, aren't you? And I think it makes you detached from it all, doesn't it?
Completely out of it now.
Does anybody from Louis' group want to launch in? Doesn't have to be desperately technical, or you could just.
Well, the first bit wasn't an answer, but it is that it's part of the whole system change, but we did have, the importance of stressing the redistributive element of it in some way, and I personally liked what the previous people said. I thought that was nice and straightforward and clear. And there was somebody mentioned that where, I think it was either where there have been pilots or maybe generally where you have a more equal society, that doesn't seem to have led to inflationary pressures. So that's based on what people had previously said, which have done, and thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a point about needing to deal with the housing issue, that should not be speculative in the speculative part. I think that was what was being said.
Okay, thanks very much, Sandra. That's great. I mean, these are fragments that are overlapping, going into each other. It's really interesting. You know, this is a conversation we're having that we can carry on having. It's brilliant. So the last group, I know Tamara was in that group and she's driving. Is anybody else from that group?
Yeah,
Want to say anything?
Mark, do you want to do it or should I do it?
I don't mind. I'm happy to do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess actually some of the points earlier have already covered what we discussed. We talked about the fact it's redistributing what already exists, and we had quite a bit of a discussion about how long it would take the economy to kind of adjust to that in terms of changing patterns of production and increasing the production of basic goods versus luxury goods, that sort of thing. We also talked about wages, the fact that when wages increase, it doesn't necessarily increase inflation, so that you could maybe apply that to UBI. And we also raised the point that Daniel raised about nobody complains about, say, increases in child benefit potentially causing inflation, or if you were to increase the state pension, I don't think you'd get the argument that would cause inflation, because implicitly we know that that will be balanced out by increases in tax. So it's just redistributing what already exists. I think that's, was there anything else, Josien?
Well, also the fact that inflation might happen, but it will be temporary. So in a way, it's like it's a symptom of production will kick in to alleviate that inflation. And in a way, you know, it's like trusting our capacity to produce. And by now we're what is it, 2023, where our capacity to produce is not the problem. You know, we can produce more than enough goods. So our production base is strong enough, and that will alleviate any inflationary steps along the way.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I mean, you've all, sorry, Dave.
Sorry, I was on mute. Elena has got her hand up.
Oh, sorry. Elena, you have up there in the corner for me, sorry.
Quickly, we were talking about whether UBI would actually contribute to inflation, seeing as the problem is to do with fuel costs. And we don't have the capacity to increase fuel costs quickly, so we didn't quite know what to do with that. But technically, it might mean that it's not, that there isn't a problem with UBI affecting, it doesn't have an impact on those costs because it's not part of those costs. But in the future, if there is a Green New Deal, then you would want that to be redistributed equitably so that you don't get the same pockets of market concentration power. And on the subject of wages, we were saying that actually UBI is less inflationary than wages going up because employers don't have to pay a UBI, but the government pays a UBI. However, we were saying that there are other complications with wages, which you wouldn't get into a conversation if it was a short one at the bus stop. So only if you had a lot of hair would you talk about that to be able to go into it.
Okay, thanks very much, Elena. Right. Well, we've got about 6 minutes left. Thank you ever so much. I don't know if you realise how hard you were going to work this evening. So I think well done, everybody. It's 8:30 in a midweek meeting. That's great. Thank you very much. Next steps. The recording will be sent out. I'm going to sit down with it and I'm going to see if I can cull everything we've said and get it into some sort of kind of order, and I can send that round and people will add to it and that sort of thing. I'll say something now about a conference we're hoping to put on in probably July, because it was July last year, which was the Basic Income North conference. That's for people in the north of England. If anybody, we're hoping to call it something like From Utopian Ideal to Practical Reality. So we're hoping to talk about these sort of issues, to talk about the real kind of nuts and bolts of how can we get a UBI implemented, and what will the effects be, and what will we have to do if we think they're going to be things that we have to deal with, those sorts of issues. And if anybody, I'm appealing now to the members of UBI Lab Manchester, and anybody who fancies travelling to Manchester to help us. We're hoping to go out into the boroughs of Greater Manchester and talk to people, set up stalls and talk to them, and have maybe not exactly this sort of conversation, but these sort of conversations be ready when people ask us these sort of questions, to be able to talk to them and to be able to answer them and to be able to give them reasonable answers to their questions, because it is complicated. It's a complicated subject, and people seem to have a kind of inner kind of, oh, that sounds good, but surely there's something wrong with it. Surely there must be something odd going on here. I think we've all had experience of those kind of conversations, and therefore this has been so interesting. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope we can carry on having these conversations as we go along. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I think we'll leave it there. We've got 4 minutes, unless anybody wants to.
Thank you
say
for
anything,
organising. No, thank you for organising.
Thank you very much.
I think Mark has his hand up, Alison.
You got your hand up, Mark.
Yeah, well, it was just a sort of final comment that I think this has highlighted a difference in the view of UBI that people maybe sort of have. And that is, if you take the average person, not the very poor or the very rich person, it's a question of whether people think a UBI means that you get more money, that average person, so it kind of lifts you up, or does it just mean you keep this more or less the same amount of money? It's just that a part of it is guaranteed now, where it wasn't before. And I think when we talk about UBI, we're not clear about which one of those we're talking about. And I think this has highlighted this talk of redistribution, but whether it's just the same stuff being redistributed has kind of highlighted that difference.
I want to add something as well.
Okay.
I want to add something, to add it to all of your heads, to plant the little seed I have. I want you all to look into your life, and then please tell me, what does money do to your life? Does it help you to create economy, or does it actually right now suppress you creating an economy? Because what I see is so many people would like to create their own economy with the people they know and they love, etc. But everybody is just like feeling forced, whatever, to be thinking rationally and to go after the money, because we have this kind of system of money. So let's be honest, what we are trying to do with UBI is coming back to our rights, to say, I have a right of living here. I'm not disturbing anybody. No rich person has the right to say, because I have more money than you or whatsoever, I will just buy, because we know how it works. I'm not saying it is as simple as it is. I'm coming and buying that house. No, but there are policies and there are ways that make money, that give people with money the right to do certain things they are not supposed to be doing. Every human being should be living a decent life in peace a right of home, a right of living, a place to be, to create their economies, and not be feeling like that to be suppressed in creating their own economy, because this is what it is doing right now.
Yeah.
It is suppressing actually productivity. That's what I see.
Okay, Tamara, we are coming right to the end here. I think that's a very passionate note for us to end on. Thank you for that. And I think, yes, you know, we have these conversations, but I think people in the network have got a lot of passion in their hearts for this, and this is why we're still here at 8:30 on a Wednesday evening. So let's take that with us. Thank you so much, Josien. That was a fantastic talk, and thank you to everybody for your time this evening. Okay, good night.